Well, welcome everyone. Today we come to chapter 6, which is called The Fullness of the Blessing. I heard about a preacher who loved to play golf, and he wanted all of his church members to be present on Sundays, and so he would preach often that they should save their golf game for another day. This particular preacher was on vacation, though, one particular weekend, and only chance he had to play golf was on a Sunday, and so he broke all of his rules, decided he himself would play golf on that Sunday. And so when he goes out there to the course, Gabriel is standing next to the Lord, and Gabriel says, "Lord, what are we going to do?" He's acting like a complete hypocrite, inconsistent with everything he's said. And the Lord said, "Well, I've got it." And so when the preacher teed off, very first hole, par 4, God brought a huge rush of wind, carried the ball all the way to the green, landed, rolled directly into the cup. And Gabriel says, "Lord, why did you do that? Shouldn't you punish him?" And the Lord said, "Well, I did punish him. Who's he going to be able to tell?" Okay? The reason I shared that is because it can be actually painful for us not to be able to share something really great that's happened to us. And this can be in the smallest little things. It could be a new restaurant you find, a great book you read. Maybe it's a movie you go to see. When you experience something good, something great, you just have to share that with someone. I'm convinced the reason the early apostles turned the world upside down is because they simply couldn't keep to themselves the things they experienced, the things they heard, the things they saw. And we see an example of this in 1 John chapter 1, verses 3 through 4. Listen to what the Apostle John writes here. He says, "We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And this fellowship of ours is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. We write these things so that our joy may be complete." We might expect John to say, "We write these to make your joy complete." But John is saying here, unless we express to you what we've experienced, our joy will not be complete. Now, here's something that's really important for us to understand, and we've touched on this at several points leading up to this lesson. There is in God's blessing both the expression and the experience. What God expresses to us doesn't become a true blessing for us or to us until we actually experience what he expresses. Now, this is what is interesting in both the Old and New Testaments. There are distinct words for expression and for experience of God's blessing, okay? And so I just want to give you these words first from the Old Testament, and the foundational term for this entire study, really, we saw it in the very first lesson. The word for the expression of a blessing is the word barak, which means to kneel, okay? And that word is used to speak of God's kneeling to descend to bless us, his expression of blessing to us. And it's also used for our expression when we kneel before him and express our heart's longing to bless him in return, okay? So this word, barak, it's used for the expression of blessing. The word in the Hebrew language that is used for the experience of blessing is the word asher. And this comes from the Hebrew word ashar, which means to continue on a straight path. And so we might wonder, what's the significance of experiencing a blessing and walking on a straight path? Well, that expression straight could also mean a smooth path. Back in this day, to travel from one place to another often included difficult terrain, ascending hills, descending hills, difficult just spaces to traverse, okay? And so to have a straight path or a smooth path, that was a good thing. Perhaps there's been a time when you've attempted to obey God's word, what he's spoken to you, all that you know that he has shared with you concerning his will for you, and you have found that it just seems like everything comes together, okay? And you can't understand, you can't explain how that happens, but you just have this sense God's making your way straight. He's making your way smooth. That's the experience of his blessing. Now, this doesn't mean that every time we obey him, we will experience no difficulties whatsoever. Sometimes when we obey, it may get harder before it gets better, but if we're truly hearing and if we're following, we're going to sense internally that peace, that straight path. And if we obey, even though it's harder, it's going to get easier. When we disobey, even if it's easier in the short run, it's going to get smoother. It's going to get better. Okay? So this is what this particular term is speaking of in terms of our experience of God's blessing. And just to give you a verse that emphasizes this, Psalm 119 verse 1, it says, blessed, and that's the word asher, Psalm 119 verse 1, blessed are those whose way is blameless, who walk in the law of the Lord. Okay? And so let's go ahead and move to the New Testament now. There are actually two verses, or two words, that are used in the Greek language. The New Testament was written in Greek. And these terms also distinguish between the expression of a blessing and the experience of a blessing. Okay, so the Greek word for the expression of a blessing is eulogeo, all right? And that's a combination of two words. The first part of that word, we get the word eulogy from that same prefix. It means simply good, okay? The second part of that word, logeo, it means a word. So this word in the Greek language, eulogeo, it is a good word. That's the expression of a blessing. That shouldn't surprise us because so many of the blessings in the Old Testament were spoken words, spoken blessings, all right? And it actually emphasizes for us just how important our words can be, how our words alone can produce an incredible blessing in someone's life, okay? That's important for us to understand, but we need to understand also that this word was used for any expression of a blessing, whether it was in spoken words or not. Listen to what this verse says. This is from Mark chapter 10 and verse 12. It says, and he, speaking of Jesus, took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. And so there's that word eulogeo. Now, we have every reason to believe that Jesus spoke a blessing over the children, but the impression we get from this verse is that there was a blessing in his taking them in his arms and placing his hands on them, all right? Those were blessings that weren't necessarily spoken blessings, but again, this word is used for any expression, whether spoken or not. And here's one of the things that's significant. There's a sense in which every blessing that expresses favor speaks. And that's because every single blessing communicates something. It communicates favor, okay? And so we hear in every blessing that we receive the heart of God, his favor, his grace toward us, all right? And then here's a fourth term for the word bless, but now again, this is the actual experience of blessing. the next word in the New Testament, the Greek word makarios. And this comes from the Greek word mak, which means extended, large, long. From this prefix, we get the word or the prefix macro, okay, which means large or great. And so this word speaks of the expression or the actual extension of God's grace and his nature, his very glory to us, okay? So when he expresses his favor and we experience it, it's being extended to us. And then we have to remember that to live in God's blessing is to live in the ongoing experience of his grace. So his grace is extended in our lives. It's made long as we live in his blessing. And this is interesting because both the Hebrew word and the Greek word for the experience of blessing, they both emphasize something that's ongoing. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word asher, to continue in a straight path. That's how we continue to live in God's blessing. This word, makarios, is what's extended, what's long, what continues, okay? So as we continue to live in God's blessing, we continue to experience his grace in our lives. All right? So here's a verse, an example. This is the term that's used in the Beatitudes. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus said, "Blessed, makarios, are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." Okay, so some versions of the Bible use the term happy for this verse or to translate the word makarios, but I believe the word blessed is better because the word happy doesn't contain or convey the sense of favor. Happiness depends on the happenings in our lives. That can be either positive or negative, and those circumstances affect our happiness, all right? The happenings affect the happiness. That's not the case with God's blessing because it consists of his favor. The essence of God's blessing is his favor. We can experience that no matter what the circumstances are like around us, okay? And so just to give you a picture of these four terms in the Old Testament, the New Testament, both the expression and the experience, you can see those words. It's not important to remember the actual words, but it is important to understand that both expression and experience are very important. We need to combine those two together, all right? And that's what produces God's blessing in us. We experience what he expresses. That moves us to express to him what we've experienced. And that's when his blessing grows to become complete in our lives. Because not only are we going to express back to him what we've experienced, we're going to express outwardly to others what we've experienced as well. We could call this our upward response to what we've received and our outward response to what we've received. And it's only when we respond in both ways, upwardly and then outwardly, that God's blessing really becomes complete or full in our lives. Let's break that down, okay? First of all, our upward response. When we respond upwardly to the blessing that we've received, there's a few things I want us to understand. The first thing is this: that actually gives evidence that we have been blessed, that we've received the blessing. Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. I love this passage because one particular day there was a group of lepers who saw Jesus. They cried out to him, asking him to heal them. And Jesus told them to go show themselves to the priest. Now, that's what was required under the old covenant for those who were healed of a skin disease. So when Jesus told them to do that, they did what Jesus told them to do. That was actually a step of faith, because at that moment they hadn't been healed yet. But on their way to the priests, they were cleansed. Now, when that happened, there was just one who came back and expressed thanksgiving to the Lord. Now, I've often wondered, is that about the, quote, national average? I mean, is it about 1/10 of all of us that give thanks? Or maybe we could say it this way: do we give thanks 1/10 of the time when we should be giving thanks? But let's understand this. On that particular day, all 10 received the gift. But just one received the blessing. How do we know that? Because his returning to give thanks to the Lord is what gave evidence that he received the favor, the grace in the blessing. That's what moved him to bless the Lord in return. Okay, so when we're blessed, our upward response is what gives evidence we've received that blessing in the first place. Here's the second thing. Our upward response is how we actually give to God and bless him. We've seen this already, that there's one thing that God will never have unless we give it to him. And that's our hearts. But when we give him our hearts, it blesses him. I can't help but wonder if we really understand or grasp how often or how deep God's pain is over our ingratitude. I mean, we all know what that sting feels like. But how often does God feel that because of our lack of any response to the blessings that he's given? I believe he feels what we feel. And he also feels what we feel when we hear just a simple word of gratitude. We give to him. We bless him. His very purpose for blessing us is accomplished because we're moved to bless him in return. And then this also is what makes our blessing complete. This is the third thing, okay? So first of all, our upward response gives evidence that we've been blessed. It's how we give to God and bless him. And then this makes our sense of blessing complete. As I think about those 10 lepers that were healed on that particular day, I have to ask myself, which of those 10 experienced the greatest blessing? Well, we get the impression, like I said already, 9 of them received the gift, okay? Not the blessing. Only that one received both the gift and the blessing, but I believe that individual's blessing was made full, complete by the expression of gratitude. Okay? And so this is just a beautiful thing, how God's blessing to us moves us upwardly in our relationship with him. But we need to understand the other aspect of this. His blessing moves us not just upwardly, but outwardly to express blessing to others. And interestingly, these same truths that I've just shared with you, they apply to the outward expression as well that brings blessing to others. First of all, our outward response gives evidence that we have been blessed. Here's something I just find really amazing and incredible about the blessing of God, okay? The true blessings of God never produce in us any kind of feeling that we have to keep it to ourselves because we're afraid that we're going to lose whatever we give to others. When we are truly blessed, His experience of favor, His grace within us is so great, it moves us. We can't help but want to share with others what we've received from Him, okay? So His blessing moves us out to bless others just as we have been blessed, okay? And so there is simply no scarcity in the blessing of God. What this means is that when God blesses someone else, that doesn't interfere in any way with God's ability to bless us. And when God blesses us, it doesn't interfere in any way with His ability to bless others. As a matter of fact, when He blesses us, it increases our capacity to bless others. When He blesses others, it increases their capacity to bless us. And so we never have to fear that we're going to lose what we give to others. What we give to others is only going to increase our experience of His blessing in our lives. And no one loves competition.